attendees trickling in here for us. I'll just kind of start us off here. Welcome everyone, as I said before, to the Scott SWCD's Plant Native Prairie webinar for 2021. My name is Shelby Roberts. I'm kind of the education and the outreach specialist for the SWCD. And for anyone unfamiliar, SWCDs are kind of just local government units that really specialize in implementing conservation practices. And those conservation practices can be anything from, urban rain gardens to agricultural practices here in Scott County to native prairie, like we'll be talking about today. So we have some really fantastic staff that specialize in all different types of those natural resource projects. And a couple of them will be here talking to you guys today about Prairie. I will go ahead and introduce Megan Darley. She's going to be starting off the presentation today. Megan, if you want to take it away, you are our natural resource specialist here at the SWCD.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, like Shelby said, I work in all kinds of different areas, lots of different projects, some lakeshore, some rain gardens, some more urban stuff, but I also help out with the Prairie program. And then I have Diane with me too. She's going to do the second half of the presentation, and she does also quite a bit of Prairie and a lot of ag focused projects too. So hopefully between the two of us, we'll be able to answer any questions that you guys have. We will have time at the end if you have questions, but just know that if you have a question, you can throw it in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen or in the chat. Either is fine, and then we'll take some time to go over all those questions. So if you think of something and you don't want to wait until the end, feel free to throw it in there and we'll try and address them as they come in. But otherwise, we'll just get started on native prairie and why to plant it. So today, when we talk about prairie, we're going to be talking a lot about native plants. And when we refer to native plants, what we're talking about are plants that were derived from Minnesota that have grown here for many, many years. They're used to our ecosystem. There was what was on our landscape before any of us ever lived here. So they have survived our coldest of winters, our hottest of summers, our droughts, our floods. Many people know or might be familiar that they can survive burns, and that's a really good method of maintaining prairie, and we'll talk about that for a little bit. But the biggest reason is that these plants are so hardy is that they have these incredible deep root systems, and that's what really sets them apart from the non-native plants that we see in our landscaping. So just a couple quick facts that you'll see thrown into at the beginning part of this presentation. Did you know that 1 acre of prairie can produce 12 tons of roots? And that's tons for 1 acre prairie. And that's because these root systems are so incredibly deep. So when we think about the plants that we use in our landscaping now, daylilies are really common. Everyone loves hostas. Those do really well. Those are hardy plants. But the reason that they are different from our native prairies is that the root systems are just a lot more shallow. It doesn't mean that they're bad for the landscape. They just don't have the strength and adaptability of our native plants. So if you take anything away from this presentation, hopefully it's just the importance of these deep root systems and what we're looking for when we plant and design prairies for people. Here's just another kind of highlighted version. Kentucky bluegrass is our most common land coverage probably now, especially in urban settings. And it does great. It looks really nice. We like to walk on it. It's nice and soft feeling on our feet. But the root systems are only 1 to 2 inches deep. And so what that means is that it can only store 1 to 2 inches of water. So in big rain events, when you have your short turf grass, after 1 or 2 inches of water, it just starts to run off of your property. It's not storing any more water. That also means it needs to get watered more frequently because it's only gathering water from those first 2 inches of topsoil along with its nutrients. So again, it's just not always a really sustainable land cover, whereas these native plants can go weeks, months without getting watered, without fertilizer, because they're pulling all their nutrients deep, deep into the soil. So it's really important to note that these root systems take a long time to develop. And so does your prairie plantings, you're doing a restoration. So just keep that in mind when we talk about establishing prairie. Many times a prairie plant, a seed that will get planted, it'll take maybe 3 to 5 years sometimes for you to actually see that plant blooming. It doesn't mean it's not growing or that it's not in your prairie. It's just spending all of its time on the roots. They just take a long, long time to develop. So just a couple things to keep in mind when we're talking about prairie. It's really all about these roots. And then just a quick comparison again of what we're talking about and why we recommend native flowers and grasses. They're just low maintenance. They don't require watering. They don't require fertilizer. You don't have to cut them. You don't have to do any type of grooming with them. Once they're established, they're blooming all season long. They're beautiful. Any of the vegetation that dies in the fall can just get incorporated into the soil. It's a really great low maintenance alternative if you have a lot of acreage or property that you don't want to be spending time mowing or working on. So just some things to think about if you're considering converting to prairie. Another fun fact, so Minnesota contains just over 1% of its original 18 million acres of prairie. And to compare that to our lakes, if we lost 99% of our 10,000 lakes, we'd have just 100 left. So it's a really dwindling ecosystem in Minnesota. I think a lot of people know us for our coniferous forests, our trees, our wooded areas, our pines, or our beautiful deciduous forests in the fall that are colorful. But in reality, about a third of Minnesota actually, especially in the western half of it, was actually prairie. But that's the ecosystem that we've lost the most of. We still have many of our forests, and if you go to the northern part of the state, and especially even down where we are here in like southeast central Minnesota, there's still a lot of forests and trees around, but we've really lost a lot of our prairie. We only have about 1% original native prairie left in all of North America, and Minnesota, we're sitting at about 1 to 2% as well. So just something to keep in mind, that it was an ecosystem that was really, really prominent in our state for a long time, and we've lost a lot of it. And a lot of it's just because of development or agriculture, all good things. We need to live, we need to eat, but we definitely want to try and incorporate back into the land if possible. So why do we want to do that? Why is prairie important? Hopefully this picture is so beautiful that it just convinces you. But if not, I'll go through many of the reasons of why we think native prairie is really valuable to our landscape. So another quick fact, 1 acre of prairie can absorb, oh, sorry, my computer's coming up the number, 7 inches of rainfall with no runoff. So a really important factor of prairie is this idea of water storage and water infiltration. Again, it's those deep root systems that are drawing the water down deep into the soil. It's going to prevent flooding. It's going to help with any drainage issues that you might have. It helps filter pollutants when it's drawing the water down. So instead of running off of our properties into lakes, into streams, into stormwater systems, it's holding it on the land and it's feeding the plants and the vegetation. So it's really critical for water storage, and we're seeing a lot more flooding issues. We're seeing bigger rain events. So having more native vegetation in our landscape is really going to help with that in the long run. Another important thing that it does is soil erosion, and preventing soil erosion, I should say. This was a project that we did down in the southwest part of the county. It's kind of hard to tell, but this is incredibly steep ag land. And it was getting these gullies every single year. And during this ravine actually heads straight to the Minnesota River. So every year this was dumping about 168 tons of soil and sediment right into the river. And that equates to about 30 pounds of phosphorus. So this project was actually converted, all of this green area. This is a newly planted prairie. It's been established now, it's in like year 4 or 5 now. And just by converting this land to prairie and having some more permanent cover, we're preventing a lot of erosion going directly into our lakes and our rivers. Another thing important to note was this was also kind of a pain of a parcel for this particular landowner to farm. It was really steep, really narrow, kind of difficult to get in with equipment. So it really made sense to take this just portion out of production and preventing a lot of the erosion along the ravines here. So that's a really important use for prairie is erosion reduction. Another quick fact, 1 acre of prairie, oops, went too fast. 1 acre of prairie can absorb 1 ton of carbon in its roots and soil per year. So carbon sequestering is kind of a new buzzword, I would say. People are talking a lot about the importance of harvesting carbon and storing carbon and paying for carbon credits. Prairie is a great way to do that. It holds a lot of carbon in its soil, and that's really important for our oxygen cycle and all of that. So another great thing that prairie does. And to kind of add to that, really it just improves the overall health of our soil. The reason why the Midwest has such great agriculture production is because it used to be prairie many years, and for hundreds of years. So it had really good infiltration, really healthy nutrients, lots of storage in the soil. So it really ends up producing productive and resilient land that can handle, again, all those wind and flooding and storms and burns, Prairie does that all for our soil. And of course, for many people, the most obvious reason that we like Prairie is wildlife habitat. It's really important for our pheasant population, but also many other critters, birds, deer, raccoons, squirrels, everything needs a little bit of cover, food, nesting habitat. All of that's really important. Also creating these conservation corridors so that wildlife can travel safely in the areas that we've now developed. So Prairie plays a really important role for all of that. And then probably the biggest reason, and maybe the one that seemed most obvious, is the importance for pollinators. These wildflowers are critical for food and habitat for our bees, our butterflies, and it's getting a little bit more buzz now, but our pollinators are really critical to food production. They're actually considered keystone species, which is a species that has an unusually large effect on its ecosystem. So if our bumblebees go, we cannot produce food, and we're actually running into that in some parts of the country. It's becoming a whole industry now to actually ship bumblebees and pollinators out to states, especially in California, where they're having these large production farms with not a lot of pollinator habitat. They can't get their almonds to grow. They can't get their food products to grow. So they're shipping bees at a high cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year spent moving bees across the country so that they can pollinate our crops. So without these species, we cannot produce food. 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food require a pollinator. So think about that. Every time you're eating, a pollinator played a role in that. And it's really important that we continue to have habitat for them because we need to eat. We're going to be pretty hungry if they go away. And one important pollinator that I want to point out that's becoming more prominent, especially in Minnesota, is our rusty patch bumblebee. It was recently added to the endangered list. It's declined at about 87% since 2000. It's really critical that we provide some habitat for this little guy. He's a really important pollinator. And Scott County in particular has been designated as one of the high priority areas for habitat. So we are working with many other programs to increase pollinator habitat. You don't have to do a full prairie to do this. I should also note, you can do small plantings. Any type of pollinator, native species, native plants will really help this little guy out. But especially in Scott County, we really need to start working on adding more pollinator habitat into our landscapes, because otherwise we're going to lose this guy, this little happy bumblebee. So if you are now excited about prairie and realizing how important it is, maybe you're wondering, well, where can I actually plant prairie? What kind of land can I convert to native prairie? And the answer is pretty much everything. But agricultural land is probably one of our most common conversions. It's a really easy type of land to convert because it probably was prairie at one point. Prairie needs lots of full sun, which is usually what ag land provides. But you don't have to convert your whole field, especially if you're still farming and producing. Maybe consider some areas that aren't as productive, where they're getting lower yield. Maybe it's really steep, it's hard to get equipment. Maybe you want to square off a field so it's easier to get your equipment around, doing some buffer strips. I guess the kind of phrase that we like to say is farm the best of the land and protect the rest. Wherever you're not getting high production, maybe consider doing some small patches of prairie incorporated in it. It will really help your crops as well and prevent erosion. Other projects that we do, again, filter strips are really common. You can just do a strip of it. If you have a stream or river that needs to be out of production anyways due to the buffer act, that's a great option to do. Consider doing prairie instead of just a perennial grass. If you have large tracts of land that you're just wanting to change, you don't want to be farming, you don't want to be mowing, that's a great option. Wetland restorations, we always incorporate some type of buffer. Same thing with lakeshore restorations. Those are great places to incorporate native plantings. And then of course, if you have lawn, I don't know about you, but this one doesn't look very fun to mow. If you've got a steep hill or a lot of acreage, maybe you just recently moved or purchased a lot and you're building a home. That's really common in the county right now. We have a lot of development and you've got a couple extra acres that you don't really know what to do with. Prairie is a really great way to reduce your mowing and to add some beauty to the landscape, and provide for the pollinators as well. So all those are great options for conversion. So now I'm going to turn it over to Diane, and she's going to tell you how you can actually plant it.
Okay,
Thanks, Megan. My name's Diane Corbell, and I'm the Ag Program Specialist here at the district. And a lot of what I do is helping people get signed up to plant prairies. I help them make a seed plan, help them carry out the seeding through to the end. So I also even do some of the seedings and some of the mowings. So I'll go through kind of a step-by-step, like different scenarios and step-by-step process for each kind of planting. And then I'll go through some maintenance tips and show you some different prairies around the county in different years so you know what to expect. And then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So planting a prairie, what does it take? So first you need to pick a site. And you're probably wondering, is my site feasible? So here are some main types of sites we deal with. But if you have a site that you think is maybe questionable, you can always give us a call and we can provide a free site visit to look at it and tell you what we think. So the most commonly planted prairies are either small gardens in your yard, maybe lawns, or the vast majority are cropland. So I'll go over like each type of planting. I'll do a brief overview and then give a couple different scenarios. So first, if you wanted to do just a small garden planting, normally people choose more flowers for these, but you could do native grasses too. The first thing you need to do is kill the existing vegetation. So when it's something small like this, you can use a tarp or multiple tarps. You can just rent a sod cutter and cut out the sod, or you could spray it with a herbicide. You just need to get rid of that existing vegetation because it will compete with the natives and prevent them from growing at first. Some people install edging on these. It's kind of a good way to keep the lawn from creeping back into them. Not necessary, but would be recommended. The next thing you do is purchase your seeds or plants. We have a list that we're going to provide at the end of a bunch of seed vendors, but if you didn't know like what types of flowers you want or what types of natives, we could come up with a seed plan for you and help you find a place that you could buy them from. We also do every spring, the SWCD has a plant sale. So if it were a small planting, you could buy just small plant plugs and fill in your garden that way. And then there's 2 planting windows for natives. The spring planting window is May 15th through June 30th, or the fall planting window is after November 1st. And that fall planting is just a dormant seed that's going to be after everything's frozen, and that's just for seeds, not plants. So say you wanted to do a small garden planting this fall. The first thing you're going to do is kill the existing vegetation. So if you're going to use a tarp or a herbicide, you want to start that now because you'll need to give it enough time where the tarp could kill the grass completely before fall. And then the herbicide, you'd probably want to start soon also because you may need to spray it twice. It's not always successful 100%. The first time you might have some that come back, and it's really important to get them the existing sod really good and killed. So you might need to do a second spray. And then if you are going to use a sod cutter, you could just do that right before it freezes up. Then you'll need to get your seeds. And like I said, we could help you with that. And then the planting window for this fall would be after November 1st. You can seed on top of snow, and that's actually kind of recommended. In the fall, it's actually nice just to do a broadcast seeding, which means you just sprinkle them on top of the ground. That's kind of why it's nice to have a snow, because it kind of sticks to it. And then when the sun shines, it kind of melts it into the ground. In the spring, the freeze thaw cycles in like March and April will work the seed into the ground. And this is how nature spreads natural prairie seeds originally. So that's kind of part of why it's so successful. It's kind of its natural method of spreading. And then next spring and summer, you would want to clip the weeds. And you would do this by just putting your lawnmower up to the highest setting, or else just by using a weed whip. So if you wanted to do a spring planting for a small garden, it would be similar. The tarp you'd want to start now too, just to get a good kill on it. The herbicide you could spray now and then spray again next spring, or you could just start spraying next spring, like early May. Usually you want to wait till the temperatures are in their 70s to have an effective kill with a herbicide. And just watch it to see if you need to spray twice. And then if you're going to use a sod cutter, you could just do that right before planting next spring. You'd need to get your seeds and plants, and then the planting window for spring is May 15th through June 30th. You could either broadcast them and rake them in. Basically in the spring, it is important to actually get the seed in the ground, just because you're not sure what kind of moisture you're going to get, because you don't have the snow cover. So you don't want them to germinate and not have any moisture. So it actually is pretty important to incorporate them in the soil. But with a small garden planting, you could do that just with a yard rake. And then sometimes in the spring, we add oats to them to prevent weeds from growing. It also gives it a little bit of shade and some ground cover. And then all summer, next summer, you would need to clip the weeds. Like I said before, put the lawnmower on its highest setting, or else use a weed whip. And you'd want to do this like every time it gets about 8 inches tall. Or else if you were going to use a weed whip, you'd just want to clip the tops off of the weeds before they go to seed. So the basics of converting a lawn, we've done quite a few lawn conversions now. And this one, the top picture, I would say is probably the best one I've seen so far. It's in its 3rd year. It was 2 acres of lawn. And he did spray it twice before we planted it. And yeah, it's in its 3rd year, and I think it's looking really good. So the basics of converting a lawn, you just need to get your seed, same thing, kill the vegetation, a couple methods for planting, and then you're gonna have to clip the weeds. So say you wanted to do that this fall, you're gonna wanna either use a herbicide or tillage. It's fairly hard to do tillage on a lawn. I just put that option there in case someone had the equipment and really was opposed to using a herbicide. I know it doesn't sound right to use a herbicide when they're not great for pollinators, but basically it's a herbicide one time in order to reestablish it into something that's more beneficial. So you're going to want to start, if you are going to spray it, you're going to want to do that soon. Make sure it's killed in case you have to spray it a second time. If you are going to use some sort of tillage, it's going to have to be multiple times, because that grass roots are going to try and reestablish a couple times. And then you do a planting after November 1st. If you have a tractor, you could rent our no-till drills from the SWCD. Otherwise, the SWCD also has a service where you could hire us to plant it. And we also can provide a list of contractors, private contractors who could plant it for you too. And then next summer, you would want to clip the weeds before they go to seed. In the first year, it is something you could do with a lawnmower if you really were dedicated to it. Otherwise, a batwing or a flail mower is a lot better. And then a spring planting would be similar, but you would want to, the same thing, you'd want to start killing it, the existing grass now, or do tillage multiple times. The spring planting window, is May 15th through June 30th. You could either rent the drill from the SWCD if you have a tractor. You could hire us, or there's a contractor list we can give you. In the spring, you do want to probably add oats for weed control, and then you would clip the weeds next summer. Cropland is one of the easier conversions to make because there's usually little to no site preparation needed. And if there is, it can usually be done with farm equipment. The main concern when converting cropland is to make sure that the herbicides used on the previous crops don't have carryover, or at least that it's not a carryover that lasts into the planting window of your natives, because they can be really prohibitive to the growth of the natives. So the best way is to ask the person who is farming it what herbicides they use and what the carryover times are on those. And we can help with that too. We have a list of herbicides and their rotational restrictions. We can help you find and purchase the seeds for your prairie. Then you'd plant it and clip the weeds. So the process is pretty similar in all three scenarios. It's just each scenario has some different nuances that you'd want probably assistance with. So if you wanted to convert some cropland this fall, you would need to know now what herbicides were used so you could plan and decide even if a fall planting is feasible. We could help you get your seed. You would plant it after November 1st, either with our equipment or you could hire us. We don't have the equipment to do a broadcast seeding, a large scale one, but you could hire a contractor that does, so that they can do a snow seeding, which are really successful. Also, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has the equipment to do snow seedings and broadcast seedings, and they also have a partners agreement where they could partner with us and help provide some seed or some planting assistance, or maybe some maintenance assistance. So if you're interested in that, you can let us know and we can put you in contact with their contact. Then if you wanted to convert cropland next spring, you would first thing check your herbicides used. Early spring, you could start looking for seed. It generally only takes 2 to 3 weeks to get seed. Right now, there's been a pretty good supply of seed and readily available, but that's not always the case. So you probably would want to be prepared to order it a month in advance. Then you would plant in the spring planting window. You could rent the drill from us. You could hire us, hire a contractor. And it's pretty important in crop fields to add oats for weed control. Just since there are quite a few weed seeds on the surface, you'd want to have some oats in there to keep them under control. And then clipping weeds throughout the summer, you're going to want to use a tractor and a flail mower or a brush hog or a batwing mower. I'll talk about this in the next couple slides, but you want to leave it like 6 to 8 inches high. So what to expect? We have a lot of people, we try and tell everyone up front that the first couple of years might be pretty weedy. And we have a lot of people who call in and say, I don't think this worked. I don't see anything yet. And that's very common. So we're just going to set the expectations. So the saying is the first year they sleep, second year they creep, and third year they leap. So what that means is the first year there's really sparse vegetation dominated by weeds. This picture here looks good. This is about what it's going to look like for the entire first year. That's whether you do a dormant seeding in the fall or a spring seeding. The natives are just building their roots. They're focusing all their attention on putting roots down, and you barely see anything above the surface. The second year is dominated by the early successors, and most of these are yellow species. So sometimes people get concerned that it's just all going to be yellow. That's not the case. the second year they just focus on kind of growing, filling in a little bit. It'll look kind of sparse, but don't worry, it'll fill in. And then the third year they start to diversify. You see more purples, you see more tall and short species, and it really starts to fill in. Here's some pictures from a first year. The top left picture is right after it was planted. What you can see is just the oats. The oats comes up very quick. And so if you don't put oats with it, it's really not required or necessary, but it is just helpful to get some early ground cover. The big picture here is a first year prairie, just has some dandelions, some mare's tail. You can't see any natives. You really can't tell what it is. And that's very common. And then there's also a picture of mowing. This is when the oats is about to go to seed. And I was just mowing it to kind of kill the oats off, get some light to the bottom where the natives are starting to grow, and just eliminate any weed seeds that might be starting, weeds that might be starting to head out. Some common weeds that you'll probably see in year one, just so you know what they are, because people often call and ask and say like, well, I don't know if what I'm seeing is a weed or a native. So curly dock, the red plant, is really not an issue past the first couple of years. You'll just want to, if you have like a small planting, you could just take a weed whip and lop the tops off. And if you have a larger egg field or something, it'll just get mowed when you do your mowings, your maintenance mowings. Then there's sweet clover. That can be a little more of an issue. Just the main thing is keep it mowed before it seeds out. Thistles are the main concern. They're really one of the only weeds that we see progressing past the first couple of years. They're also the ones that don't always get choked out or get killed by mowing. And so if you do have areas heavily dominated by thistles, you might have to do some spot spraying. Then there's giant ragweed. That's not very common past year 1 or 2. And also mare's tail, very common in the first 2 years. So most of these will generally be seen really heavy in the first year or 2. And then past that, generally get choked out. Here's some pictures of second year prairies. You can tell they're coming, but they're kind of thin still. There's more yellow than anything. And then you can still see kind of a lot of ground in between. But if you would go down to the bottom of them, you can see a lot of little baby ones, baby plants coming. And then here's some in their third year or beyond. You can tell a lot more filled in. You can't see the ground, more color variation, more species diversity. So this is what they would look like going into the future. These are just some pictures of different prairies from around the county. The top left was in its second year, and that's why it's so yellow. Doesn't look like that anymore. It actually, the picture on the top right is the same place, just 2 years later. And then the bottom left is a lawn conversion by Fish Lake. These are some more examples, just to show you that some people choose to have more grasses in their mix, and some choose to have mostly flowers. So there is a little bit of leeway in what you can plant, and there's a big variety of seed mixes to choose from. Generally, the ones with more flowers are more expensive, but some people like those more, and other people just choose grasses because they're just looking for nesting habitat. So a little bit on maintenance. I probably touched on this already, but the first year you're going to have to mow it 1 or 2 times. Some people suggest even up to 3 or 4 times, but from all the ones we've installed, generally once or twice is enough. You just want to hit it before the weeds go to seed and before it gets tall enough that it's going to choke out any light that needs to get to the natives. When you mow, you're going to want to mow like 4 to 8 inches high. So not all the way to the ground, but you want to get some light to the ground, but you don't want to damage what's already there and growing. Like I said before, if it's just a small garden planting, you could use a weed whip or put your lawnmower on the highest setting in the first year. And then in the second year, you would not want to cut it that short. And then for like larger cropland, you'd want to use a batwing or flail mower. And the SWCD does have a service that would custom do the mowing for you too. So the second year and beyond, you might need to mow 1 time. A lot of times it's just spot mowing, just getting the little patches of weeds if they're there. If you do mow the whole thing, you'd want to keep it 6 to 8 inches tall just to not damage the growing natives. And then you might need to spot mow or spot spray, and that's mostly pertaining to thistles. Then every 4 to 5 years, we do encourage to burn, either burn or mow to the ground. Both of these kind of have a way of invigorating the existing prairie. And then they can also choke out some weeds and some cool season grasses that don't have as extensive of root systems. So the SWCD does have some programs to help with this. So if you're converting a lawn, we offer a $500 per acre one-time incentive. The minimum on it is a ½ an acre. And even if you don't have a ½ an acre, we can provide a free site visit, free technical assistance, help preparing a seed plan, finding seed, help finding a list of people who could do the work. Then if you have small acreage cropland, we also have that same $500 an acre incentive, one-time payment. And that's for between a ½ acre and 2 acres of cropland. For larger acres of cropland above 2 acres, we do pay a rental rate, and we can give you a cost estimate for an exact rental rate payment, but in general, they're between $100 and $200 per acre. And then in doing so, you sign a 10-year agreement to leave the prairie in place. We also, for those larger plantings, reimburse for 50% of the expenses, which could be seed, hiring someone to plant, spraying if necessary, things like that. So to recap on the different assistance that the SWCD can provide, for any Scott County landowner, we can provide a free site visit. We can free planning assistance, helping you pick out seed, make a seed plan, find someone to buy the seed from, give you lists of resources, provide a cost estimate on how much we think this is going to cost you, give you maintenance advice first up front, and then say 5 years in, you want some advice on deciding if you should burn or if you should mow. We can come out and do that for you. And then we also have custom planting and mowing services for a fee. Here's some of our partners we work with to do this work. And since 2000, we've installed over 800 acres of prairie. So now we're going to take questions. If you want to get started, there will be a form at the end, and I think Shelby can elaborate on how to do that. I think you fill out the form for assistance. So maybe Shelby, you want to talk about that quick, and then we can go into questions.
Yes, yeah. Thank you guys both for your presentations. So as attendees of this webinar here, I'll be sending you guys kind of a follow-up email tomorrow, and that email will contain a link to a survey to let us know, how we're doing with our education programs, where we can improve, what your thoughts were on it. And at the end of that, there will be a little contact form that you can fill out if you are interested in, our technical assistance or a site visit, or if you have any questions about your site specifically, we would be happy to come out and help you with any questions that you may have. A contact form will be in that survey in the email that I send out, along with some of the information that Megan and Diane were talking about, like list of contractors and just general information that you can use if you are interested in planting a prairie on your property. So we will go over a couple questions here. You guys have some good ones in the chat, but feel free to pop any questions that you might have either in the chat or in the Q&A. We will get to those. There was one question here for more of like a home garden situation. Is there anything that can be done, any recommendations that you guys might have for something that is very dry and partially in shade?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some things that can grow in more shaded areas. I will just say that in general, most of the native plants just require a lot of sun for them to really thrive. There are some things that do okay with a couple hours of shade a day, but there's a pretty big difference. I mean, you can plant a lot of things, they just might not get as big, they might not bloom. So it really depends on what the partial shade is. For native plants, like full sun is like 10 plus hours a day. And partial shade is like 8+ hours a day of sun. So it would just be something that we'd have to look at when we come out on site and help you assess and make some recommendations. But many of these plants really need full sun to thrive and to get the color and bloom that you're probably looking for.
I'll just add to that. In the spring, we have like a plant sale. And so if it's something like the size of a garden, we do, I think, Megan, do we have a shady kit mix or like a woodland edge? And they're not probably the same kind of plants that you've seen throughout this presentation. They are native and they do have some flower structure to them, but you're not going to have this kind of prairie look to it. It's a little different.
Another question, you talked a little bit about this, Diane, but how can you tell the difference between weeds and prairie plants when you're mowing or when you're doing maintenance?
Yeah, it's kind of tough if you don't know what the weeds are. The weeds I showed, like those 5 weeds I showed, are the main weeds. But really the best thing is just to call us up and say, hey, can you come show me what's good and what's not? Otherwise, we could maybe refer you to some books or some references, or you could send pictures and we could tell you. But yeah, the main thing is just what I do, because some natives are really hard to identify when they're young or before they're blooming. So really, I have all the weeds memorized, so I know what's weeds and take care of those. But really, like the first year you mow, you're gonna mow everything, just a blanket mowing. And then the second year, it actually will be pretty obvious because things will be blooming. So I guess a variety of those things, but you can always call us or send us pictures and we'll either come out or we'll know which ones are weeds or not.
Yeah, I think I would just add, like what Diane was saying, is that I think the first year, especially, people get really concerned about what's out there. And just in general, just to reiterate, almost everything that you're going to see the first year is going to be weeds. Most of the time, I won't even come out and look at a prairie until about early July, because anything that's growing before June or July is probably a weed. They're warm season species, so they won't even start to bloom until our soil temps are like above 60 or 70 degrees. So if it's early on in the year, it's probably weed, and it's okay. You're just going to mow everything, and don't get too hung up on trying to figure out what's native and non-native, especially those first few years. You're just going to be mowing everything. So we'll help when we can, but for the most part, it's small and green. Our guess is as good as yours the first year. So
One interesting question here. Are federal carbon credits available to folks who install Prairie?
That is a good question that I don't know. We've never helped anyone with that yet.
Yeah, it's kind of a new program too, and I
Mhm.
don't think that you would be uneligible if you did our program, but our program isn't designed to get you credits. So you'd probably be eligible. I just don't know that it's not part of the program. We're not offering credits through our incentive programs. Maybe one day.
One participant asked if we could share the presentation, and yes, we can. This is actually being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel either tomorrow or Friday. And you will be able to have full access to that whenever you would please. And a lot of the more technical information that was covered can be found either by filling out that contact form and having us come out and answer any questions that you guys might have there. And some information will be in the little packet that I include in my follow-up email. So you should be able to get all that information there. There was another question. If you are outside of Scott County, are there similar resources or programs available? What do other conservation districts offer?
Yeah, I would say if you're out of Scott County, I would first contact their soil and water conservation district. And if they don't have a program themselves, there is the federal CRP program, which does have more of a pollinator friendly version. And even beyond that, I think the soil and water district in your area could help you find, there are programs, you know, some things through the state. There's a lot of different organizations starting things like this, may not be the same as ours, but similar. And I think they'd be the first point of contact to help you find the right resource.
One question on different types of seed mixes. So someone is mentioning, you know, grasses that are 6 feet and shorter and 3.5 foot tall grasses, and just the notion of different grass and flower seed combinations. If you were doing one single larger project, what's the feasibility of having different seed types within that same project?
Yeah, so I mean, the companies we work with have like, they each have many seed mixes to choose from. The main difference is the amount and variety of flowers in them. So that's usually what sets them apart. But if you wanted to, you could tell us exactly which plants you want and don't want, and we could make it work in a seed mix for you. So there's really a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, you can do custom mixes. You can mix different seed mixes together and throw them all out there. I think the biggest thing with Prairie is that eventually it's going to start to self-seed. So it wouldn't really be possible to like separate like a tall prairie from like a short prairie if they're, I mean, eventually stuff's going to kind of grow where it wants to grow, as Mother Nature intended it. So, but yeah, the more customized you get, they do get more expensive. But it just depends on what your budget is and what you want to see out there. So yeah, possibilities are endless. There are so many seed mixes out there to choose from. So
yeah, I would add to that what Megan said. I just mowed a prairie that was just seeded to grasses at one point because they couldn't plant the flowers at that time because of some herbicide issues. And the neighbor has about 5 acres of prairie with flowers in it. And now there's quite a few flowers in their prairie. They didn't even have to plant them. So they do seed out quite a bit.
Question just came in. Any advice for planting on septic mounds?
Yeah, you want to be a little careful with the type of mix that you use for septic mound because you want species that maybe don't have those very, very deep root systems because you don't want them to mess with your septic. So there are actually specific septic mound mixes out there. Many suppliers carry them. We also sell one in the spring during our plant and tree sale. So definitely try to stick to one that is intended for septics, because the root systems are a little bit less deep growing for that particular instance. But it's the same establishment as the lawn conversion. You'd want to kill all existing vegetation, do a broadcast seeding. If it's in the fall, it can be over snow or on frozen ground. If it's in the spring, you want to incorporate it with some oats, the same type as the lawn conversion, but definitely be a little more careful when you're picking your mix.
I think those are all the questions that I see that have popped up right now. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in there really quick. But I will probably start wrapping things up. Thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Diane, for your wonderful information. Again, I will be following up with an email for all of you guys with that contact form and a little survey, as well as some resources for you on the information that we've discussed today. So thank you all for taking a little bit of your evening to learn with us tonight. Appreciate having you guys here.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to reach out with questions, even if you're not really interested in moving forward with anything, or just, I mean, that's what we're here for, to offer help. So just reach out if you have any questions to any of us.
Perfect. Thanks again, guys. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.